All right, welcome to the Explainer. Today we're jumping right into one of the most debated passages in the entire Bible, Matthew 24. For centuries, it's been a real source of confusion and controversy. But what if the key to understanding it all isn't some hidden code, but actually lies in the simple questions the disciples asked right at the beginning? Well, stick around because we're going to show you just how that works.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with the pretty dramatic event that set this whole thing in motion. Then, we'll break down the core question the disciples were really asking. And after that, you'll see how a simple shift in how we look at it can make this entire complex passage suddenly make a whole lot more sense.
So, to really get a grip on the disciples' questions, we have to first understand what prompted them. And it all started with this one absolutely stunning prediction from Jesus that, well, it pretty much changed everything for them. So picture this. The disciples are there, they're admiring the Jerusalem temple. I mean, this was a massive, breathtaking building, the very heart of their world. And in that moment, Matthew chapter 24, verse 2 tells us, Jesus says something just jaw-dropping. Not one stone shall be left here upon another. He's talking about its complete and total demolition. For these disciples, this was just unthinkable. I mean, an absolutely earth-shattering statement. This building was the center of their national identity, their religion, their everything. So you can imagine, this declaration immediately led to some very urgent questions. So a little later, they're on the Mount of Olives, looking out over the city, and the disciples pulled Jesus aside for a private conversation. And we need to listen in really closely to exactly what they asked him. Okay, so this single verse, Matthew 24:3, has been the source of just endless debate. I mean, countless books written about it. And the main issue, the reason for all the debate, is actually deceptively simple. Yeah, for centuries, scholars have been arguing over the grammar right here. When the disciples ask about your coming and of the end of the age, are those two separate things they're asking about? Or are those two phrases just describing one single event in the future? And this lays out the puzzle perfectly. You see, on one hand, you could read this as three totally distinct questions. But on the other hand, it could just be two questions, one about the temple and one about the one sign that signals both his coming and the end. And depending on how you read it, you end up with vastly different interpretations of Jesus' answer. But what if arguing about whether it's two questions or three is kind of missing the point? What if we've been so focused on counting the questions that we've overlooked the real key to the whole thing? So let's just try shifting our focus for a minute. Instead of counting the questions, let's look at what the disciples were really concerned about. What were the actual subjects on their minds? And here it is. This is the key insight. Their question wasn't just about one thing. It was about two different categories of things. First, they asked about timing. When will these things happen? The temple's destruction. And second, they asked about signs. What will be the signal for your coming and the end of the age? Now, seeing this distinction is brilliant because it shows us how Jesus actually answered both of their concerns. But he did it separately, and his answers are captured for us across two different Gospels. So the Gospel of Matthew, which is what we're focused on, it primarily answers that second question, the one about the signs. It lays out the sequence of events that have to happen before he returns. So Jesus gives this clear progression of events, though he doesn't put a timestamp on it. He talks about birth pains, wars and famines. That's followed by a period of intensifying trouble and persecution, then one single decisive sign, and finally, the big climax of his return. This whole sequence answers the what will happen question. Okay, but what about that first question? The timing question. When will the temple be destroyed? Well, for that specific answer, we actually need to look over at Luke's gospel, which recorded the very same conversation. In Luke chapter 21, verse 20, Jesus gives an incredibly specific, observable sign. It wasn't some secret code or a hidden date. Nope. It was a clear military event that would tell believers exactly when to get out of Dodge, because the temple's destruction was at hand. And guess what? This is exactly what happened in history. In AD 70, less than 40 years later, the Roman armies surrounded Jerusalem and they completely leveled the temple, fulfilling this prophecy in stunning historic detail. So, once we separate the temple's destruction, which happened in AD 70, from the signs of the end times, a new puzzle kind of comes into focus. It's like solving one mystery just reveals the next one. Yeah, with the fall of Jerusalem accounted for, our attention now shifts to this really key phrase Jesus uses, the abomination of desolation. He points to this as the decisive sign that things are really kicking into high gear for the end times. Now, when we explain the source material here, interpreters usually land in one of two main camps. The preterist view says this event already happened, probably something to do with the Romans desecrating the temple back in AD 70. But the futurist view says no, this is an event that's still to come, and it likely involves a future world leader and a rebuilt temple. So this all brings us to what might be the most important question of all. Why? Why did Jesus give this prophecy in the first place? Was it just so we could satisfy our curiosity about the future? Well, Jesus makes it really clear that a whole lot of things have to happen before the end comes. The whole point wasn't to give people a secret timetable so they could make charts and predict dates. The point was to prepare them, to encourage them to endure through really difficult times. You know, it's not an accident that right after this prophecy in Matthew chapter 25, Jesus tells a bunch of parables. And these stories aren't about predicting the future. They're all about how to live right now. They're called to be watchful, to be faithful, and to be ready. And that's really the final question this whole passage leaves us with. It kind of pushes us to shift our focus away from when is this all going to happen to the much more important question, how should we be living today? Because ultimately, this prophecy isn't just about prediction. It's a powerful, timeless call for preparation.